Amnesty International have published a report into the UK's welfare system, with Labour's latest welfare cuts pushing people beyond the brink. Amnesty International UK's new report takes a deep dive into the murky and divisive world of the UK social security system. The unique research is an extensive look through the lens of human rights violations across our basic rights to housing, food, education, healthcare, and social security. The evidence delivers damning conclusions on how the system processes, punishes, harms, and dehumanizes people and fails to meet international legal obligations. Successive UK governments have ignored the UN's pleas to take urgent action to fix this. The rate of poverty in the UK is now higher than at any point in the 21st century. 16 million people in the UK are living in families in poverty, almost a quarter of the UK. Of these, 5.2 million are children, 9.2 million are working age adults, and 1.5 million are pension age adults. In 2024, 86% of low-income families on universal credit went without essentials such as heating, food, and clothing. The report, named Social Insecurity, followed 700 benefit claimants, giving an insight into the welfare system and how people are negatively affected by it. These are two of the claimants who have given their accounts to Amnesty. They told me to go in for an assessment, and my baby had passed away, not even 2 days before. And they were like, well, if you need the money, you will come in. It's not my fault your baby is dead. I would often be asked the same question 3 times to see if I'd change my answer. The process feels like you are on trial for murder. They act like they're trying to catch you out and that you are begging. Now, earlier on today, I spoke to Jen Clark, Amnesty International's economic and social rights lead, who authored the report. First off, can you talk me through the 700 claimants you worked with? What was the most common experience you found with them?
So we talked to 782 people. About 147 of those were advisors, and they were around the UK. And what we did with their testimony was kind of benchmark them against international standards of what social security systems are supposed to be according to the UN. And so the findings are, well, it's no surprise to anybody, given that the poverty levels are 16 million and 36% of children in the UK experiencing poverty, that the level isn't enough. The payment level is too small to meet the purpose, actually, of a social security system to ensure people can have an adequate standard of living, afford food and housing. But the large bulk of what the findings kind of indicate is that the system is too difficult to navigate for people. The assessment processes are quite brutal and often don't turn out the result of people getting access to the benefits that they're eligible for, meaning people have to go through long, kind of lengthy appeals processes to get what they're entitled to. And 7 out of 10 PIP claims that go to appeal are overturned. So people do get granted it, but it takes up to 18 months. And one of the biggest things that I think came out for me that I was not surprised about, but the wealth of feeling about this was overwhelming, really, that people just don't feel like they're being treated with dignity and respect. You know, there's a real issue in the social security system that people feel like they're being treated cruelly, whether that's because they're getting 100% sanction, you know, their basic universal credit just being stopped because they've missed a bus, or and the lack of compassion in the interactions with DWP. So we had one lady who talked about losing her child and then being told she had to make her appointment or she would be sanctioned, you know.
I mean, of course, issues with our welfare system has been from successive governments. That's laid out. But can you tell me what the impact has been from Labour's policies, especially the cutting of personal independent payments?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Various different governments have played sort of political football with the social security system, and that's exacerbated poverty. It's made it worse. It's exacerbated mental health problems. Actually, loads of people told us 78% of people who were sanctioned said that they had a negative impact on their mental health. And people are, you know, sharing kind of suicidal ideation and stuff as part of the research as well. It's awful. the hope that this Labour government was going to come in and reform the welfare system to be more human rights compliant, I think, has gone now. We're in a situation where the cuts that they put forward in the Green Paper and the Spring Statement are retrogressive. There's no two ways about it. They do not tackle poverty. They, in fact, through their own impact assessment, which many people believe is an underestimation, they do say that 250,000 more people will be in poverty. That's a retrogressive measure. They are removing some of the legal protections for uprating methodology. So basically, the Secretary of State can set benefit levels. What's supposed to happen under the international frameworks is that minimum level should be protected cast iron as a methodology and a measure of a minimum standard of living. So some charities talk about it as an essential guarantee. It's like a protection floor that no one should fall below. And we don't have that in the UK. What we have is bits of legislation that say how the government should make decisions on welfare. And in order to implement the cuts, in the social security benefits, they're going to have to unpick some of those legal protections that mean that they have to be uprated annually. So actually what we're doing is taking a massive backward step when what we should be doing is actually doing the opposite, legally protecting these rights, legally protecting a social minimum floor no one can fall below in their standard of living, so that you can't have political whim just ripping people's rights away, making their poverty worse.
You've worked with a lot of claimants, right? I think over 700, you said. Have any of them felt there's been a change in the last 9 months, obviously, which is when Labour came to power, and that is for better or for worse?
Not specifically over that time. Interesting though, to come back to that dignity and respect point, if you talk to claimants in Scotland about their experiences of the system, the part that's partially devolved, so the adult disability payments, claimants of that say it's still not enough, but at least they treat us with compassion. So there is a real significant difference in their experience of how they're interacting with government officials through their claims. So there isn't a specific kind of deterioration or improvement since Labour came into office. But there are significant improvements. It shows that you don't necessarily have to spend money to change culture. And that's what's at the heart of the indignity, right? Where's the accountability for that? It's not built into the system. How can people get access to justice for that? Well, they can't. There's no legally protected rights.
What other things do you think we can do to immediately change this? And then I suppose another question is the wider implications, the wider policies, whether it's looking at the media, because the way people are stigmatized in the media, whether it's looking at the economy as a whole, maybe a universal basic income, that everyone has sort of a basic level of living. Is that something that maybe you would hope to see from this report?
Yeah, so we have a long list, but the quick fixes, these are things that need to happen now to stop the harms that are happening within the system. So lifting the two-child limit for sure. There's an opportunity to do that through the child poverty strategy. Is it looking likely they're going to do that? I'm not sure. And that includes the benefit cap overall as well, and including the local housing allowance and re-indexing that to the real cost of rent. We also think that the 5-week wait loan that is given while someone's waiting to claim universal credit, but then gets immediately deducted from their first payments and their payments every month until it's paid off, that could just be given as a grant, because what you're immediately doing is taking a level of social security benefit that's already too little and making it even lower immediately on day one. And absolutely, sanctions don't work as an incentive to work. Even the DWP's own evidence suggests that. Stop them and don't make further measures like those that have been proposed in the Green Paper that make things worse. That needs to stop. They need to rethink that before they go too far down that road. But the answer to this is in legal protections and in wholesale reform, like a beverage report. Labour Party politicians have mentioned that in the lead up to the general election, beverages 5 giants. It feels like a moment where we need to review what we've got and reform it to make it fit for purpose today. So that's the Social Security Commission. They had one in Beverages Day. Let's do that again and reform. That's going to take a long time. I get that. But we can't tinker around the edges anymore. Even politicians are saying that it's a broken system. Let's fix it properly, not patch it up. And that means looking at the legislation that underpins the social security system to make sure that the rate of benefits is attached to the real cost of the essentials, not based on CPI and all of these other things until you get the starting level right. And we haven't got that. And until we protect that so that you don't get someone coming in with a political ideology that's very different and just removing them completely. And that they are vulnerable. People feel vulnerable. People feel targeted. We need to stop that.
That was Jen Clark, author of the Social Insecurity Report. The full interview will be dropping tomorrow. Sarah, are you surprised with Amnesty's findings?
No, not surprised, Curtis, just kind of horrified all over again. I think what Amnesty's report is actually telling us is something that the left have been saying for a considerable amount of time. We've been saying this for years, that the UK's welfare system is deliberately weaponized against those that are most marginalized, most vulnerable, the working classes, and not just by the Tories, ironically enough. Like, I think we kind of have to step away from the 40, I mean, we should always talk about the 14 years of austerity and Tory rule, but now we're seeing Labour governments really like kind of get into this bipartisan like cruelty. And if we actually like try and posit this in a historical context, this has kind of been happening since the late 1940s when the UK's welfare state was built off of off the back of Beveridge's report. So we are seeing, I think, reenactments from history, and it's happening again, except now it's happening under a Labour government, which is really scary. But even when we talk about like the Beveridge's report, like that was founded on the idea that the state has a duty to protect its citizens from the five giants. What was it, like want, disease, ignorance, and I can't remember the other two. But by the 1980s, you've got Thatcher, who then declared this war essentially on the post-war consensus, selling off council housing, deregulating the labour market, and then kind of begun this moral like crusade against the so-called like dependency culture. And then I feel like the same thing kind of happened under Blair and then Brown, because they did bring in like workfare and then these sanctions and means testing, but they accepted the logic that poverty is something that's self-inflicted, that poverty is a behavioral failure and not like a structural outcome. And that's the issue that I'm having with this, because even under Starmer, they're echoing that very same thing, that everything you do because you're poor is because of something you've done and not because of the things that successive and now prospective governments are continuing to do. So Amnesty's findings as a whole aren't shocking. But I think what it does reveal is that just how far people have fallen behind when it comes to class solidarity or social solidarity as a whole. And I think it's a frightening time to be existing under a Labour government who, people voted for because they were like, we're sick of the Tories, like we don't want Tories anymore. And then they're emulating the same sort of like, I don't know, austerity in some ways that the Conservatives did. I don't know. I feel like this is genuinely, maybe I'm being a bit dramatic, but I do feel like this is state violence. Why are we still seeing so many people struggle in the way that they're struggling? And a supposed Labour government that's supposed to be for the labourers, it's supposed to be for the working people, posit itself as something that's telling working people that you're failing because of yourself and not because of the things that have happened because of shit governments, essentially.
I mean, you're not overstating it because it is a form of state violence. What was interesting with that conversation with Jan is, of course, uplifting benefit payments is a must. It is inadequate. It's our welfare system is incredibly low. Compare it to our European counterparts. But one of the key things is the bureaucracy and the means of communication. I don't know if people watching have been through the benefit system. I have, and I can tell you outright, the communication side is abysmal. It is terrible. I wanted to speak to an agent, right? And what you have to do is log in to your journal online, leave a message, wait for them to respond. And I just wanted a simple phone call. So I would say, please, can you respond to this? And it was kind of a mismatch. They wanted to do things by journal. I wanted to do things by phone. Then there's, of course, the culture around it, which, again, Jen points out through these 700 claimants. And, we didn't need this report to know that there's a culture of fear surrounding benefits because of the accusations. And that's what we bring into the media. The media constantly pushes this narrative that either people are lazy, or they don't need it, or we can't afford it. So the media is one of the biggest players in all of this when it comes to the fear and culture when it comes to welfare.
People don't understand how that the welfare state or the welfare system as a whole is so invasive and dehumanizing in so many ways. The shame that surrounds it is damning, and it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that, because what should happen is that we have a structure that is good enough and fit enough to actually cater to the most vulnerable and the marginalised, but that it's not doing that. And what I find really irritating at the moment is that Labour's current leadership is constantly saying, we're trying to be fiscally responsible, fiscal responsibility, but who are you trying to be responsible to? Fiscal responsibility to whom? Because it's not responsible to starve kids. It's not responsible to then go really, really hard on the two-child benefit cap and all this sort of stuff. I think that what's concerning here is that their responsibility should be to cater to those that are being failed by a really, really shit system that doesn't cater to the working classes. Why is it that we still exist in the welfare system where people are uncomfortable to approach the welfare state and say, I'm struggling at the moment, I've fallen out of my job, or I've lost my job, or I'm now disabled. And then you have to go through this really big process of analysis on what Labour wants to introduce in terms of the point system. So the whole thing is dehumanising. And I don't know what we're seeing, even with the two-child cap, it's not a neutral accounting measure at all. It's something that is an ideological bludgeon rooted, I think, is eugenics. I think there's a eugenic logic to this, where they're trying to revive some sort of Victorian poor law, where they're like, oh, you're poor, so you should suffer more. Why are you trying to make people suffer more than they're already suffering? They're suffering already at the expense of your policies and the shame that you're trying to exude to those that are impoverished already. So yeah, I don't know. I do think there's a eugenic behind it, and I'm sick and tired of feeling like we're living in some sort of Victorian poor laws being introduced again. Oh yeah, well actually you should, we see it with Wes Streeting and what he echoes recently with the whole we just get up and work and all this sort of stuff. We want more people to get into work, and what you're saying is that actually you don't believe people. You don't believe that people are struggling as a result of successive governments or as a result of your government. And I think that deniability is something that's so harmful if we want to actually move forward.
I wanted to pick up on what you said earlier about the Beveridge report, right? And this is also what Jen speaks about. And it's interesting, obviously, after World War II, we had the post-war consensus, which is that we're going to invest in people, we're going to invest in council houses, we'll have the NHS, we'll have a proper welfare state. And you can see that over time, through neoliberalism, certain aspects of the state isn't sort of rolled back in isolation, right? The rolling back of benefits, for example, doesn't happen by itself. It happens along with, less council houses, for example, weakening unions, using the state essentially as little as possible, and essentially using private involvement as much as possible. So you're seeing here as different aspects of society sort of are all working in tandem with this neoliberal policy. And I think that's clearly by design. It's not just about, we want to reduce benefits and attack people on benefits. It's we need to do that whilst also attacking council houses, for example, destroying the public realm in its entirety.
The Beveridge report is very, very relevant to this. I think when we try to posit this within a historical context, it actually makes it so much more damning, because I'm trying to remember, I think it was Squalor and Idleness as well, that they were we need to save people from these five giants. But I find that there is this almost neglect. That's not the right word I'm looking for, but they do willfully neglect those that they deem to be just lazy, and that's not the case at all. And I feel like they're picking up on some right-wing rhetoric that's actually really, really harmful, where they're like, oh, like, come on, you can just get out there, but let's strip this from you and let's make it harder to access certain forms of housing, or let's increase the number of landlords and they can have more properties, and let's not close these tax loopholes. Like, there are so many things that can be done. There are solutions that we are giving to these awful things that they're doing, but no one seems to be listening. So I don't know what's going to happen as a result of this report that Amnesty have released. I'm glad they have released it. But again, it's going back to what we were saying earlier. It's something that we have revealed time and time again.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.